Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. If I could have your attention, please. We welcome you here this morning to celebrate the life of Mr. Edward Abendschein. The service will be led by the family, beginning with his son Jonathan momentarily. Before we begin, I'd like to ask you if you'd please be so kind as to silence any cell phones or devices that you might have so the service is not interrupted. At the conclusion of the service, the family will be joining us in a procession to Mount Olivet Cemetery, where Edward will be laid to rest. If any folks that are not family would also like to join, you're invited to do so. We would ask you at the conclusion of the service to depart and proceed to the cemetery. If you're not familiar with the area, it's located at 725 Baltimore Street here in Hanover. So basically, you would just leave the funeral home entrance. You would take a left and just follow on this route that runs right in front of the funeral home, which is Route 94, and you would go south about 1.8 miles and you would see the cemetery there on your right. So again, if you're not family that's in the procession, you're still welcome to join them for the final committal at Mount Olivet. I'll give the address once more at the end of the service, just in case you need it for GPS purposes. So we thank you for your kind attention. On behalf of the family, we thank you for being here this morning to celebrate Edward's life. And with that, we'll turn things over to his son, Jonathan. Thank you.
Can everybody hear me okay? Good. So thank you, everybody, for coming. And I just mean that very deeply. I've been just surprised at how much it has affected me here today, just to be able to see all of these people who cared about our dad, and to talk with you all about memories, things that I had never heard about my dad, and just to see all the people that he made a difference to in his life. And so it's bringing me a lot of joy today in amidst the grief, and I want to thank you all. I'm going to give the eulogy today, but in talking about this eulogy, in building this eulogy, this is it incorporates memories from so many different people that I've been able to talk to. So this is from all of us. So you all know my dad, our dad, Ed Abendschein, was an unusual person. For me, coming to terms with this loss has been actually really tough. I've been missing the rich life experience he brought to us, and all of the analytical and intellectual conversations we used to get to have, and I've just been feeling his absence deeply. It's been helping me to remember. I've been trying to remind myself that there can be opportunity in loss, and while we've lost the chance to enjoy more of my dad today, we have the opportunity to begin remembering him. And so today I really want to start that process of remembering him so that we don't lose him. And that's what this eulogy is for. I hope to paint as complete a picture of him as I can today, not just through my own memories, but also the memories of other people in his life, his siblings, his children, his grandchildren, his friends, and all of his other loved ones as well. About 15 years ago, I sat in this very room watching my dad do his eulogy for his mom. He said he wanted to do her memory justice in ways that he hadn't been able to do for his dad. The eulogy was beautiful, and it brought an even richer picture of her to our minds than even when she was alive, and we want to do the same thing for him. My dad started his mom's eulogy talking about Mount Olivet Cemetery. She and her husband were deeply rooted in Hanover, active in the church, part of the business community, and prolific volunteers, and it was natural that they found their final resting place here. But my dad, even though he was very tied to Hanover, lived far away his whole life. Anyone who knew him and saw all of the places that he lived and traveled might be surprised to see him interred here. But he was deeply of Hanover in his own way. He had one foot here his whole life, even as he traveled the world. He wanted to respect and honor the people he was connected to here. So today we'll inter part of his ashes here to honor that connection, and another part of his ashes will travel to be scattered or interred in other places that were precious to him and near other people that he treasured, so that we all can continue to treasure him. When he spoke about his mother, he spoke about history and how it affected the context she grew up in. I enjoy history, but the level of detail and depth that he went into, understanding that he had, is tough to match, and I don't expect to do justice to all the things that he experienced about the world. But I'll add a little context. In his mother's eulogy, he spoke about how she was born before women could vote and how the Methodist Church worked back then. He spoke about her burial in when he spoke about her burial in Mount Olivet, he also talked about the Forest Hill amusement park down the road, where people of color from Maryland would go because they couldn't go to the segregated amusement parks in Maryland. He said that it gives no disrespect to Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King Jr., and those other rightfully famous leaders of the civil rights movement to point out the success of those movements was in no small measure underpinned by the millions of white Americans who understood that when civil liberties are denied to any Americans, they can easily be denied to all Americans. This was really important to him. Like many others in his generation, including other members of his family, he took part in civil rights protests aiming for equality of all and intellectually supported these movements his whole life. His way of speaking about civil rights issues in history would never keep up with the way language has evolved in recent years, but his heart was still aligned. My dad was born a few years after World War II in Hanover. He always used to jokingly tell us he was hatched out of an egg, fully grown. His sisters remember him being a serious little boy, a far cry from the often goofy adult he became. But he wasn't shy or retiring. Apparently, when our dad was 3, he would sit out up front on 3rd Street, just talking up a storm with anybody who walked by. Life in Hanover was very family-oriented when he was a kid, and I expect it still is. For the family, it was housework and yard work on the weekends, picnics in the yard or with the neighbors, church, biking to school, coming home for lunch in the middle of the day, basketball in the backyard. He and his brother Bill even made a skating rink in the backyard one year. He was a dutiful kid, learning piano, teaching Sunday school, working with his dad around the house, visiting the factory, and I believe also working in the factory a bit at New Way as a kid. Hanover shaped him, and I know he carried Hanover with him. For example, he knew the Battle of Gettysburg in depth, studying it over and over as a kid, and he took us there and had us watch the whole Ken Burns Civil War documentary to pass on that knowledge. And I'm just going to give a little aside there. We drove out to the visitor center yesterday, and it reminded me there's a billboard there that's been there apparently for decades, Ed's Elephant Farm Museum and Emporium. And every time we headed past that thing, he knew that we would give him all kinds of a hard time if we ever saw that sign. So every time we drove by, he'd say, "What's that over there?" and make us look off to the other side. It took years before we caught on to it. All right, so Ed grew up with big differences in age between him and his siblings, which meant he was alone a lot as a kid. His sisters were much older. He had one brother close to him in age, Paul, who died when my dad was 3, and Paul was 1.5. The loss of my dad's brother Paul shaped him deeply. Something about the way he experienced his brother's death when he was a kid led him to want to always speak the truth, sometimes even regardless of the cost. Sometimes it was bold and honest, and sometimes he ended up characterizing his truth as the truth, sometimes to the detriment of relationships. But for him, it was all related to this deeply impactful experience, which he dealt with in his own way. My dad's brother Bill came along when my dad was about to enter elementary school, and despite the gap in age, they still connected. He appreciated how his brother Bill made him laugh and how they would joke together. I remember him speaking to us about that all the time. Bill remembered how when Bill was trying to learn the Scout law, Ed snuck a tape recorder under Bill's bed and played it all night. A Scout is trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. A Scout is trustworthy, loyal, without Bill even knowing. And the next morning, Bill knew it by heart. That story reminded me of how important Scouting was to him, both as a kid and an adult. He either achieved Eagle Scout or achieved everything he needed for that rank except the pull-up requirement, depending on who is telling the story. One of his formative experiences was leading a canoe camping trip, a Boy Scout trip on his own. It gave him the confidence that he could lead and organize people. And he kept all the old Boy Scout magazines. I remember getting to read all those old piles and piles of old Boys Life magazines in the basement when I was a kid and feel connected to him, his childhood. He volunteered with the Scouts, sometimes as a Cub Master, sometimes as a Scoutmaster when my brother and I joined. When my dad and his siblings were kids, there was little or no TV and few records around. It wasn't easy to make calls, and households mostly had just one car. He and his siblings were kids during the early stages of the widespread electrification of America. I work for an electric utility, and you can see electric use, you know, and you look back historically, and you just see it skyrocket in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And that was him. You know, the arc of his life included humanity making advance after advance, and he always believed that he saw the world becoming a better and better place around him. He was very optimistic about the world and about humanity. He lived through so many explosive changes in technology. I remember him talking to us about fixing it about how he was fixing a copier one day, and he noticed the wire between the scanner and the printer. And he said, you know, you could probably just extend that out. And that's exactly the kind of thinking that eventually led to the fax machine. He was not surprised when people came out with the fax machine. He lived through the advent of personal computers, which he enthusiastically embraced and made sure that we learned about. And then the internet. Our household was one of the earliest adopters back when the internet was dial-up with just, all you could find was a little directory of links on a web page called Yahoo. My dad had no sense of taste, and people who saw him later in life showing up in his sandals and his t-shirts might think I mean his dress sense. But I'm saying he literally couldn't taste anything at all. And he didn't realize that until one time he was a kid, and you know, he used to think everybody was just making up things about food for fun. You know, that this tasted like that and that tasted like that, until one day a family friend came over and had talked about not having a sense of taste of their own. And he finally realized that he was different from other people. He was missing a sense. And this was one of the things that made him him. He really felt separated from people because of that. 3 times a day, people would enjoy tasting food and talk about it, but it was something he couldn't participate in. But he put people at ease about it by joking that, you know, when people asked him, how do you like it? How does it taste? He said, it just tastes like a Big Mac. Everything tastes like a Big Mac. And they say that when you lose one sense, others become heightened, and I have no idea if this is connected or not, but he had an incredible memory. He had the ability to hold several conversations at once, and he could speed read 10 to 20 times as fast as anyone I know. In his mother's eulogy, my dad talked about his parents' very different experiences of college. His dad was the first to go to college in his family. His family had to scrimp and save to get him there. His mother, on the other hand, came from a well-off family where everybody went to college. Our dad's experience was a mix of the two. His family was well off enough to get him to college, but he really had to hustle to make enough money to support himself while at college and after college. He went to Oberlin, inspired by his step-grandfather, Pops Conwisher, we think, who felt it was very well regarded theologically. Our mother went there too, though they didn't meet there. Oberlin was a really exhilarating experience for him. It was a liberal college where he could be the very different person who he was. It allowed him to expand his horizons intellectually and emotionally and get to know people who had very different views. And he found ways to grow as a person beyond just schoolwork. He loved that college, and he and my mom contributed to it and participated in it the rest of their lives. My dad left college with a degree in philosophy. He did his thesis on the debate about how we know that the planets revolve around the sun rather than the other way around. Before college, at one point, he had wanted to be a missionary, and by the time he finished college, he wanted to become a professor of philosophy. But he just liked to think long and hard about what it meant to be human. And neither of these paths, though, were really for him, ultimately. After applying and being rejected from several graduate schools of philosophy, he did what many people with that educational background do. He studied to become a lawyer. He got his law degrees. He focused on tax law at Hofstra and NYU. In those days, he was he was living with very little money, doing various jobs. He was selling insurance, driving school buses. He was an orderly at one point at an institution, and generally lived with no money out on a farm in New Jersey. During that time, he met our mom, and who he had encountered at Oberlin once or twice. But he really met her for the first time in New York. He asked her out, he pursued her intensely, and he would go to New York on the cheap, sometimes even sleeping in doorways to see her. He spontaneously got her to allow him to visit her in Greece while she was traveling around Europe. He tried to hide that from his parents, but they found out after he lost his passport, and it was mailed home to his dad, who was not happy. Later on, they then lived in Long Island with 2 phone lines to hide that fact from their parents, although he thinks his parents probably knew at some point. And eventually they married. It was complicated. She was Jewish, and her parents were very hesitant for her to marry a non-Jewish man. But he won them over, and in part by agreeing to Jewish names for the kids, Jonathan, Daniel Aaron, and Lauren Beth. The whole courtship was complicated, but she and my dad were part of the baby boomer generation, which was something he was very proud of. He was very proud of the way that generation helped redefine the way people could live their lives together. I think my parents' courtship and marriage would have been a lot harder in another time and place. Our dad's parents instilled a sense of family in him. It was a value that he and our mother shared and passed on to us. He always showed up to support family, even before he had one of his own, showing up to keep his sister company when she was pregnant and her husband was on the road, making sure all of his siblings were able to attend his wedding, working with the family after his father died to make sure that the business continued and his mom was supported. Their mom was supported. Despite those law degrees, my dad ultimately went into the family business, manufacturing. Our dad's death a couple weeks ago was likely related to his heart condition, and we, his family, are working out how to care for the business at the moment. His career started under similar circumstances. His dad died of a heart attack when he was in his 20s, and he and his family stepped in to run the business. It was tough to get by. My dad talked about, at one point, only being able to keep up with the bills by rotating balances from one credit card to another. And I'm sure it was tough for Bill and for all the others who were helping out as well. And in the process, in that process, you know, he took something from it. He had to learn to do things really efficiently. And he was proud that people told him that nobody can make a nickel go farther than Ed Abendschein. He ended up running New Way both in partnership and on his own for a good 50 years. Along the way, he ran other businesses too, including an incinerator business and a food packaging company in California, moving his family to Stockton for 5 years, which generated a love of California that led us all to move there as adults. It meant a lot to our dad that the work he and the family did helped contribute to the support of their mom, of the family, various causes close to his heart, and most importantly, the people who worked for New Way and retired from New Way. He was most proud, and I most admire, and I think his whole family, what I admire about both him and his whole family was how their work gave the people around them the ability to thrive, that they were all able to thrive together. Running New Way really worked for his personality. It gave him the opportunity to experience the world in a different way. You know, like his dad, he traveled both for his own enjoyment, but also for the company as well. He had so many different stories. He had a story about being prevented from leaving Saudi Arabia during a business dispute, how they gave him more food that he could possibly eat on a business trip to Europe through, you know, meeting customer after customer after customer after customer, taking him out. And he learned about the U.S. through its trash as well, with the incinerator business. I can't remember the specifics, but he just come out with these wild and obscure stories that he learned through the incinerator business. I think at one point, yeah, he had something about a classified defense site that he couldn't talk about everything, but you know, it was really interesting. And he had a really prodigious memory. There were so many things he just remembered that others didn't. And all these stories, unfortunately, a lot of these stories are lost, and that makes me really sad. When he was growing up, my dad's family drove all over the U.S. while his dad, my grandpa, made sales calls. It was really meaningful to my dad, who grew up to love being on the road. He drove tens of thousands of miles around every year, all around the U.S., both for business and pleasure. I remember, I think Hertz at one point banned him because he ended up putting thousands of miles on a rental car in a month when his own car was down. Growing up, we took incredibly long summer road trips. We visited 49 of the 50 states by the time I left high school. And he took long, and it was important to him, you know, to make sure that we knew this country, you know. And he took long drives on his own his whole life, even after his kids had left the house. He would drive out to see his grandkids every month or two, stopping by in Iowa or Colorado to see siblings, nephews, and nieces, and their kids. And this travel wasn't limited to the U.S. My dad wanted to see the world. When he was young, he thought he might have to join the Merchant Marine to see the places that he wanted to see. But over the years, he ended up managing to see all the places he wanted to go, traveling to over 100 countries on every continent over the course of his life, and inspiring a love of travel in his family. In many of these places, he followed the same habits he had in the U.S., zipping from place to place to place, country to country to country, checking off as many countries off his list as he could. He liked to really, as I remember him, police almost, I think, arrested him when he was driving into the Baltics, because who drives into the Baltics for a day, you know? So, like, you must be doing something shady. So he really liked to see the way that people lived, or he liked to pursue a geological or historical quirk, and often he skipped the popular sites. I remember one of our big trips, we took a big family trip to Australia when we were kids, and we skipped all the popular sites like the Great Barrier Reef, and we just drove for a week straight up through the center of Australia, through the outback, one of the most desolate places on earth, over hundreds of miles of corduroy roads. A few other things about Dad. He loved games. He played unending games of solitaire and Sudoku. We played a lot of board games growing up, also thanks in part to my mom's good taste in board games. He was a fairly successful poker player, a prodigious reader, and had a deep love of geology and history. He loved literature so much that he even tried writing his own books. I think he had 3 unpublished books, just because he wanted to see what it was like. One of the things my dad loved the most, though, was being a dad. He loved kids, even before he had his own, always playing peekaboo or talking to little kids when he was traveling. He was very open and gregarious with children. I always remember him being able to connect. He wanted to do everything he could to help us along our path. He wanted to instill important values like hard work, being resilient, treating others with respect, and thinking about global welfare. He modeled those values himself, sometimes to the extreme, like when he'd yell at people who littered. He wanted us to work hard and achieve. He made sure we played instruments, played sports, and appreciated the arts, and he supported us. He supported my brother's work to achieve his Eagle Scout badge. He went to every one of my football games, even in college, and drove my sister across horrendous New Jersey traffic every week to make sure she had a French horn teacher that could help her on her path to the prestigious Oberlin Music School. Sometimes he and my mom did as well as parents, sometimes they didn't, just like any parents. And there were things we appreciated and things we wished were different, but I know that on balance they did really well with us. We've stayed very close as siblings. And working with my brother and sister on this memorial on my dad's estate, dealing with the business, it's shown me just how close and capable and responsible we've been able to be as siblings, and that, I think, more than anything, honors our dad's memory. Our dad enjoyed being goofy. Everywhere he went, he broke the ice with little corny jokes. How are you today? If I were any better, I couldn't stand it. The other one I heard today, I've heard so many great memories from everybody today. I think the other one I heard today was keep your words small and sweet, because you don't know when you might have to eat them. I don't know that he followed that one all that much. He didn't ham it up all the time, and his jokes were sometimes complex puns, but he just liked being silly sometimes. He loved coming up with bumper stickers and t-shirt slogans. There are probably some photos on that photo reel with him with some wacky slogans. Our dad had a really strong personality. He was often lovable, genial, and supportive, and I've been so struck by how and really comforted by how genuinely fondly everybody that I've talked to around Hanover and here today has spoken about him. And sometimes, you know, and probably everybody has seen this once or twice, he'd sometimes become uncompromising. He needed to be right. He needed to speak his truth. He liked to debate, which was something that some people loved and others found intimidating. And when he felt like he was right, he fought hard. In business conflicts, he said you had to make it too hard for the other guy to do anything other than what you wanted him to do. And once in a while, he brought that approach into his personal life, and that made for some hard situations once in a while. In his later years, though, my dad kept right on doing things that were important to him. He kept working at New Way. He said he wanted to be the oldest owner in the packaging machinery industry, which would have required him to work to 90, but I think he planned to do it. He had new and old friends on the East Coast in California who were very important to him, and for who he cared for very deeply, a lot. He traveled to see the people he loved, still driving across the country to see siblings, nieces, nephews, and their kids, and of course his kids and his grandkids. He talked a lot about his grandkids, and he really enjoyed them. My daughter Iris loved how he would get her treats, how he would give her great hugs, and the time he picked up trash with her in the park with her at her request. Russell loved his grandpa Ticklemonster, looking at car engines with him, pretending to be a pro football players Sauce Gardner and Deebo Samuel. And he bonded with Owen and Sam over and over and over in the backyard of their house in Southern California. I want to hold on to all these memories. Today we'll bury our dad in Hanover, and just as Hanover was the first step for my dad in a life that affected all of us, that stretched across the country, the world, and so many people, his burial today will be the first step for us in remembering him. He touched all of us, and we can hold on to that by keeping him alive in our hearts. Thank you for taking time to honor him with me today. Thank you for being here. And thank you for everyone who's shared your memories of him with us. As hard as it is to lose him, it makes it easier knowing that he lives on in every one of you and in all of us. Thank you. And now Vernon will tell us, help guide us to the next step in this journey here.
Thank you, John, for that beautiful tribute for your dad. I'm sure that's inspiring to all of you as it is to me. I know that's not an easy thing to do, but it's a beautiful job you did. And again, we thank you all for being here to honor Ed. And as we mentioned before the service, we'll now be traveling with the family to Mount Olivet Cemetery. So again, those of you who may not be family members, the family has extended an invitation if you wish to join them. And just once again, the address is 725 Baltimore Street if you're using GPS. If not, you just leave the funeral home out here, make a left, which is Carlisle Street. When you get to the main square of Hanover, on the other side of the square, it turns into Baltimore Street, but it's just a straight ride, 1.8 miles from here, and the cemetery will be on your right-hand side. So at this time, folks, we invite you to begin dismissing to your cars. And again, you're welcome to join the family at the cemetery if you choose to do so. Thank you all again so much for your attendance, and may God bless you.